Okay, a quick one to start off, just as some context, I guess, and you can keep it as brief as you like. Maybe just both of you want to give a brief introduction to your role and responsibilities, and a couple of top-line things that are on your respective radars at the moment.
Sure, you want to go first, Chris? Yeah. So Frank McKay, Chief Supply Chain Officer, maybe a little bit of a different twist is that I also have responsibility for our procurement and supply chain services offering. So, not just a cost center, but also a profit center as well. And things that are top of mind right now, I'm going to be really boring and say AI, of course. So standard answer for the today and the sessions that we're hearing. And then the other thing is geopolitical issues that are going on that everybody's having to deal with in one way or another. So yeah, that's kind of keeping me up at night right now.
Thank you, Frank. Graham, same answers, maybe, perhaps?
Yeah, a little different. So I'm responsible for Jabil's procurement organization. We cover about 35,000 suppliers. So you get direct materials, so electronics, metals, plastics, and then indirect as well. As far as what's top of mind right now is basically how do we get parts? How do we make sure we can keep our lines running in these extremely turbulent times?
Great. Well, let's get straight into it. Complexity seems to be one of the themes here. Why don't we start by perhaps you can give the audience an understanding of some of the complexities you're facing in the supply chain at the moment.
Sure, Matt. Yeah, so we're managing on the upstream ecosystem on the manufacturing side for Jabil. We've got about 450 customers that we service, and they're pretty much the household names. They're driving tech and innovation. And it's products that everybody's either got on their person or they've certainly got in their home or in their car. So we serve about 8 or 9 end markets: defense, military, aerospace, data center, which is responsible for a significant part of our growth story these days, all the way through into industrial, consumer, healthcare and medical products as well. So we've got a really nice kind of world view of what's going on and how these markets are moving, shifting, pivoting and growing for the most part, which is part of the good story. So that's the customer side. Graham mentioned, since he just spoke, it's now 38,000 suppliers because we keep adding. So it's a pretty complex ecosystem. We're managing about $25 billion in spend. It's about 70-something% of the revenue for Jabil, so material acquisition side, and we're procuring goods and services, servicing about 100 different Jabil facilities across 30 countries. So there is complexity involved in it on the logistics side, and obviously legislation and tariffs and duties and everything else that I'm sure the audience is extremely familiar with.
Sure. Graham, anything to add on that one?
I don't know how I can add to that.
Let's not add more complexity.
I mean, the one thing I would say, we've got 38,000 suppliers, excuse me, and we can't treat them all the same, right? We have to, think about how best to segment our suppliers, make sure that, we're truly working with those partners that are going to help us deliver products for our customers. So we've got different ways of how we segment them and make sure that we can manage that complexity. But it's a daily challenge, as Frank says. Every time we have a new customer come in and we have a new product, we're adding suppliers. So
how do you, let's dive into managing those suppliers a little deeper. How do you do that? I mean, as you say, a vast number of suppliers. And I know something you talk about is treating suppliers as an extension of the company. Maybe you want to explain about how you do that and why it benefits you?
Yeah, so we have obviously a large organization. We're covering all these different categories of components, different commodities, the indirect side, whether it's goods and services or some of the products that we require in our factories. But within that, we've obviously got strategic supplier relationships. We really double down on that. And then we have about 120 suppliers that we wrap in cotton wool. They're essential for Jabil's success, essential for our customer success, and we call that our supplier relationship partners. So we've got a management team, supplier relationship management team, that manage these 120 suppliers, makes up about $10 billion of spend. Critical for the markets, the customers, the applications, and the technology that we require to help, the Jabil business continue to flourish.
Great, thank you. Sounds like a complex task. Keeps you busy.
It does, yeah, yeah, and for every, there's so much going on in the world, and every region there's a good day, there's a bad day somewhere else, and suppliers, with the tagline we have is we treat our suppliers like customers. And we genuinely try to do our best, because if we don't have suppliers who are willing to invest in the health and well-being of Jabil, it just makes things just that much harder. So we spend a lot of time nurturing those relationships and trying to drive credibility into the conversation as well. We've built some, I think at this point, pretty mature, robust processes that allow us to navigate whatever's going on in the world with these suppliers. And at the end of the day, the goal is to make sure that our factories keep running, that they have the least amount or hopefully no disruption. And as Graham said earlier, we actually get access to the components that we need.
Yeah.
Because in these days, there's just so much constraint because the demand is far greater than the supply of a lot of these components, especially in the semiconductor world, especially in memory. It's a little bit of a war out there on getting access to these components, and that's where, when suppliers have choices to make, and they can only build 100 and they have demand for 200, they've got to go decide who doesn't get it. And hopefully we've behaved ourselves over the course of many years, and that the reward for that, I think, manifests itself in just access to material and parts that we need, so we can keep the factories going and therefore service our customers, make sure that they can get the products on time.
Thank you, Frank. Obviously, the theme of this fireside is procurement as a value driver. I know it's a phrase that's probably used a lot. What does that mean to Jabil? What are the kind of KPIs that actually matter to the business, and how do you measure those effectively?
Yeah, I can kick us off here. So we're really fortunate that there was a decision made about 6-7 years ago to move this role to the C-suite and report directly to the CEO. So we have a little bit of a voice at the table, and we actually grew some muscles through that process, which was nice. And I was fortunate enough that it was me that was asked to go take that role on. And within that, then we just looked and said, look, what are we really good at? What do we drive for excellence in? What do our customers that we build these complex products like about us? What do they trust us to go do? And could we actually take that and monetize it for non-manufacturing relationships and offer it out as a service beyond the traditional 450 customers that we're building products for? So whether that's advisory, whether that's managed services, whether that's subscription, whether that's logistics as a service, full supply chain as a service, we have some technology in there. We've got an AI investment that we've made. So we pitched the idea that, hey, if we can do this for these 450 premier brands, maybe we could open up and open the aperture a little bit and see if there's a spot for Jabil, and do we have the right to play in offering this out and use our name as a little bit of power. So we started up organically. We were fortunate enough that we demonstrated that there was a need out there, that the Jabil name kind of meant something to people. So we grabbed a foothold, proved it out, and then we went and said, hey, would you give us access to some funding to go inorganically and go make some acquisitions? So we're 4 acquisitions in at this point. We've got a joint venture with an AI company, and as I said at the very start, we're very fortunate that we get to run a very, very complex procurement supply chain organization, but we also get to run a business as well, and we have the P&L responsibility for that set of service offerings that we have.
Thank you. When you're chasing that value, I guess, from now into the future, what's the single biggest value driver you're looking at for 2027? I won't ask you to look beyond, that maybe you thought would have been difficult or challenging to achieve, say 5 years ago.
You want to take that? You want me to have a bow?
Shoot.
Yes. So, I think, look, everybody's, I think we offer really competitive service, and I just look, and I look at when we look at the leading indicators of what's moving the business and what's shaping strategy, it's not going to get any easier out there in the near term, for sure. The world isn't going to become any less complex. I don't think there's going to be less volatility. I think there's probably going to be a little bit more volatility over the next year or two. I think we are really, really well positioned to be able to capitalize on that with our experience, with our global reach, with the expertise that we have. And I think we've got a really solid offering. And that global footprint for us plays and listens really well with our customers as well, because if there is geopolitical things that pop up in any particular country or region, we've got optionality across the globe to be able to shift and move that business. And that's the same for the services organization. It is truly global in nature as well.
Thank you, Frank. And Graham, as CPO day to day, what are you looking at as a value driver?
Yeah, I mean, for me right now, the focus is absolutely on making sure that we have that material that Frank mentioned is in short supply. Probably spend 75% of my time right now on shortage calls, talking to suppliers, trying to make sure that we get our unfair share. And that's where, some of our behavioral traits start to really help us, where, we call it our 4Cs behavioral strategy. So it's all around consistency, credibility, communication, and collaboration. And by behaving ourselves and by making sure that our suppliers, when they have that choice to make, think of Jabil first, we sometimes get a few more components than, perhaps one of our competitors. So Yep. Really helps us drive the business forward, make sure that we're supporting those customers that Frank mentioned earlier. So, for me, the big KPI right now is just keeping lines running. We've got over 100,000 people sitting in factories, and if they're sitting idle, then we've got a major problem.
Sure. Okay, great. Well, look, last question. For those in the room still caught in that kind of cost center trap, won't ask you to put your hands up, but I guess what's the first step from both of you in terms of moving towards becoming a value driver and I suppose more strategic within the organization?
I would actually say just stay in your lane. It's way easier. But no, no, I think, every company is unique, every situation's unique, but I think if you really want a seat at the table, you've got to push for metrics and look for ways to go value just beyond the traditional, cost-saving metrics, for example. And one of the things that, we spend an inordinate amount of time on is asset management and working capital and the value that we bring there. And that gets a huge amount of scrutiny. We're a publicly traded US domiciled company, so it's all public information, and the investors pay real particular attention to that. We ship about $80 to $100 million of product a day. Okay. So every day that we can move off the Jabil assets and get it off the books has a material impact. And then just the margin side as well, having the ability to be able to create margin for the company in addition to cost savings, and then the asset management side, it's just something that procurement organizations should be pushing for. If you have that seat at the table, and if you have that voice, and you have that expertise and leverage, and you build up that credibility that Graham mentioned earlier.
Great, thank you, Frank. Graham, final word.
Yeah, I mean, very, very similar to Frank. The elasticity that we require in the supply chain is really enabled by our supply partners. And again, we have to make sure that, we're bringing material in when we need it, and we're not bringing in too much, because then we've got a problem from a free cash flow perspective. So it's all about positioning that inventory, making sure that, we're bringing in the right amount at the right time, and, we're obviously, using preferential payment terms to help us there. So, all these things just add up.
Perfect. Well, Frank, Graham, thank you both. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Great example of really extracting that value in the enterprise as we move forward.